Okay, it is my privilege to introduce Will Bolton. Will is the curator of Duarte Garage and Lincoln Highway Museum, which is on the corner of Portola and North L. He is an aerospace engineer with degrees from the University of Kansas. He manages the Exploratory Systems Engineering Department at Sandia in California. He's a good friend. He's my former manager. So let's all give him a big welcome.
We're going to try to adjust the lights so that the pictures will show up a little better. Can everyone see this okay?
Yes.
No? Okay.
Yeah, we have to stand way back on the screen.
Yeah, well, the problem is I need to be able to see the screen too. So, well, if there's any opportunity to relocate, that might be good. Or maybe if I stood over there.
If you need to relocate real fast.
How about this?
Yeah.
Okay. If I'm in your way, let me know. So, the topic today is the restoration of the 1920 Seagrave fire engine. This was a fire engine that was purchased in Livermore, bought in 1919, delivered in 1920, and has been in town ever since then. And so this is a story that I was directly involved with, and hopefully if you have any questions I can answer that. So this is the emblem of the Seagrave soldered to the radiator shell of the fire engine. So what I want to tell you is a little bit of Livermore in the early 1900s, the environment in Livermore, which has to do with why the city bought the fire engine, the history of the Seagrave process a little bit, the engine, and then a little bit about the restoration. And I have about a 10-minute movie I want to show at the end, so hopefully we'll have enough time to look at that. There's just some barely edited video that I shot during the restoration process. So this is a representation of the city of Livermore in the late 1800s. And to sort of orient you, this is First Street here, and the railroad tracks entering town and splitting. There is a warehouse district and some loading facilities and so forth, warehouses. And on the corner down here is a St. Michael's Church. And so that church is no longer there, and that has to do with why there's a 1920 Seagrave fire engine. So this is the St. Michael's Church, built in the 1880s. A couple of shots of it here. You can get a picture, idea of what it looks like. Again, we're looking northwest. This is First Street. Oops. This is First Street here, if you can see the pointer, and the church. This is the City Hall building, which became the fire station, City Hall, and eventually a jail back here behind. It was redone, so it looks different. It was redone in sort of an Art Deco style some years ago, so it looks a little different now, but it's the same building. So that's the St. Michael's Church. This is St. Michael's Church on fire in 1916. So you can see the steeples kind of flaming, smoking, and they're playing water on the building next door, trying to save it. And about the only firefighting equipment available at the time was hose carts, which are hand-towed either by a couple people or maybe by a horse, unreel the hose, hook it to a hydrant, and shoot water. Not very much ability to battle back a significant fire. Here's another picture, a little more developed. You can see all the shingles are burned off the steeple, and basically the entire building was consumed. So that's one motivation for buying some more efficient, more effective firefighting equipment for the city of Livermore. Now this little building here is on 2nd Street. It's a salon of some sort. I don't know, say a nail salon or hair or something of that nature. But the story about this reason is interesting is because Dennis Bernal's brewery burned down, and there's an interesting family story about some gold that was stored. His wife had stored in the building, which they were able to recover. Otherwise, it was a total loss. Bricks from the brewery were salvaged, and that's what this building is built out of. So there's still some little bit of the brewery present. But now you can imagine, early 1900s, the church burned down and the brewery burned down, so everybody in town is interested in having some better firefighting equipment. So that led to November 17th, 1919, the Livermore City Council authorized the acceptance of bids, going out for bid for fire engines, and they accepted a bunch of bids, and the one they, or received a bunch of bids, and the one they accepted was the most expensive bid they got, which is from the Seagate company. And the reason is because it had the largest pumping capacity of any of the fire engines that were offered. So this was bought for a price of $10,750, and it was delivered in 1920 to the warehouse area that I mentioned to you down on First Street. Came on a flat car from Columbus, Ohio, and was delivered and has been in Livermore pretty much ever since. Now this is actually a picture from the Seagate company, which is still in business building fire engines. And this is a picture of the Livermore fire engine when it was built at the factory. And you can't see it, I'm sure, but down here is the serial number of our fire engine, and it's stamped on several places on the engine. So this is our original fire engine. It's a little hard to see, and I pointed out in another picture, but when this was delivered, it had wooden wheels and solid rubber tires. And that's not what's present on the engine now. It was changed in probably the late 1930s to pneumatic tires and artillery wheels, or regular kind of truck wheels. So anyway, that is the Livermore fire engine prior to delivery to Livermore. There we go. Now this is the Carnegie building, the back side of the Carnegie building, the south-facing side towards 4th Street. And these are 2 fire engines that we still have. All 3, these 2 plus 1 more fire engine are in the Duarte garage at Portola and North Livermore Avenue. So that's a 1919 Model T chemical engine. It was somewhat like fire engines that you used to see hanging on the walls, where you pick it up, turn it over, it dumps a little acid into soda water, pressurizes the container, and squirts a little bit of water out. So this had probably a 30 or 40 gallon tank on the back that worked just that way. You turn it over, it spritzes soda water out on the fire. This is the 1920 Seagate, and you can see here the wooden wheels and rubber tires. That part of it looks much different today. But and then these are all volunteer firemen, and their names are noted there. So anyway, this fire engine also appears in this photo. There's the 1919 Model T, the 1920 Seagate, the 1944 Mack truck. All 3 of those are currently in the Duarte garage, and a white and a GMC trucks, which are long gone from the city. This is the First Street fire station / police station / city hall jail. And on this wall, just to the left here, there's a mural that shows 3 fire engines, which are these 3 fire engines. And there are firemen, as you can see in the mural, and those aren't just random, representations. Those are actual people. And at least one of the people that's on that mural will appear later on in the video that I show you. So this is the Seagrave after it had its active service. After it was no longer a frontline truck, it was kind of moved to the back of the firehouse and was held in reserve. And the reason it was used in reserve for so many years is because it had such a powerful pump. So if they had a fire that really needed a lot of water, they would bring this out of reserve and move it to the fire and use it for additional firefighting capability. After it was no longer viable as a fire engine, it sat next to the fire station outside until a few parts disappeared from it. They decided they needed a more secure storage location. So it was moved to this location, which is next to the railroad tracks, near Old First Street, where the Ace train station is. So it was stored there for a number of years, and you can see it's relatively intact, but it shows the signs of being stored outdoors for a number of years. It was then moved to the sewage treatment plant. You can see the tanks here. This is out next to the airport, on the north or south side of the airport. It was stored out there until 1976, and this is the Seagrave in the process of being towed out of the fire station and moved to the Duarte garage on Portola and North L. So this is what both the garage and the fire engine look like in the garage, where it sat from the late 1970s until just about 10 years ago now, when the restoration of the fire engine started. This is what the Seagrave looked like sitting in where it had sat for decades in the garage, in the north end of the Duarte garage. This is Chuck McFan, and those of you who are Lawrence Lab alums may have encountered him when he worked at Lawrence Lab. And I'll also tell you that majority of the people, almost all the people involved in the restoration were retirees either from Sandia or Lawrence Lab. And at one time I looked at the group of people standing around there working, maybe 6 or 8 people, and a good 5 or 6 of them had PhDs from either Lawrence Lab or Sandia. Only one of them was an actual truck mechanic. So in spite of those handicaps, we actually got the engine restored. So Chuck had begun taking parts off the fire engine, and one day I was down going to an open house at the garage, and somebody said, "You need to go over to the north end and take a look at this fire engine they're starting to restore." And I saw the parts coming off and just being put on the floor, putting on a shelf, put all over. I said, "This is going to be chaos." So I volunteered to help keep track of the parts. So I took pictures and recorded where parts went. And one day I was taking pictures and somebody handed me a wrench, and that was the end of it. Then I was doing restoration. So this is a kind of an interesting picture. It shows the right rear wheel, and you can see the more modern pneumatic tires and the double wheels in the back. You can also see this is a jack axle and a sprocket, and a chain going around the actual road axle, the one that holds the tires and is in contact with the road. So this is a chain-driven truck, which was very common among heavier vehicles during the early 1900s. That's just basically a gigantic bicycle chain, and almost all the links in that chain were rusted, so they didn't move. So part of the restoration process was freeing all that stuff up and lubricating it so it was usable. Now this picture may or may not be immediately identifiable to you. For the few of you who can't immediately tell what that is, I'll explain. This is me laying on the floor underneath the Seagate engine after the oil pans had been removed, and I shot this picture looking straight up. So this is a connecting rod disappearing up into the bottom of the piston, the wrist pin, and the bottom of the cylinder here. This is the cam follower here. It's hard to tell, but if you're close enough to look at it, you can tell it's a roller follower. It has a cylindrical roller that follows the cam. This is the exhaust cam. There are two cams, one for the intake, which is on the far side over towards where John's sitting, and the exhaust cam, which is over here. And the exhaust cam has two lobes. This one which provides some lift for the valve, and this one which doesn't. So this is all about compression release. So in order to facilitate starting this engine, you can pull out the compression release, which slides the exhaust cam so that the roller is on this lower lobe, and the exhaust valve never fully closes, so you don't have full compression, which makes it a lot easier to crank the engine for starting. Once it's running, then you push the handle for the compression release into the dash. The exhaust cam slides this direction, and now the follower goes over this lobe. You get full lift and full closure of the exhaust valve. So anyway, that's a little feature that's really facilitates starting this engine. There is a hand crank and an electric starter, and if you can imagine hand cranking this engine, you'd need some help. This is a 1,013 cubic inch engine that produces a little over 100 horsepower. Top speed, maybe 1,800 RPM. So if you calculate that out, the amount of torque it produces is immense. The stroke is very long. It's big pistons, inline 6-cylinder engine. This is sort of the state of the fire engine when we started the restoration. This is the dash in the instrument cluster. The compression release handle would be sticking out of that little hole there. This is a floorboard with a kind of a pyramid pattern aluminum stamping on it, which is all over the running boards and the floorboards of the engine. Most of that, since it's aluminum, had corroded and was unusable. And of course, the instruments themselves, everything is dirty, corroded. The glass is broken out of our oil sight glass. So a lot of work required to get it back in shape. This shows the other side of the firewall, and that's Jim Bemke, a retired Sandia engineer, and Herb Stowers, who some of you may know from Lawrence Lab, also a retired engineer, working on the engine. One of the big challenges was checking the valves and lapping the valves to get good seal on the valves. We had one cylinder back here, number 5 exhaust valve, which is very hard to extract. I'll show you a picture in a moment. I think it gives you a better impression of what the engine looks like. But it's a 6-cylinder inline engine with dual ignition. It has a magneto and points ignition, 2 spark plugs per cylinder, so there's 12 spark plugs. The exhaust valve is in the head. It's a T engine with the valves pointed upwards on one side, the exhaust valves and the intake valves on the other side, and the cylinder in between the two. So the intake flow comes in through the valve, over to the cylinder, down into the cylinder, out of the cylinder, and out through the exhaust valve on the other side. This is all, the cylinders and heads are cast as one piece. So you have 6 individual cylinder heads and cylinders bolted to the crankcase. The valve covers are large castings, iron castings with a hex recess in the top with a pipe thread on it. And so we got all of them out except for one, the number 5 exhaust valve, which is a problem. We had to get them all out to make sure the engine was in good running condition, so I'll have a little more of a story about that in a minute. I'll have it right now. So this is Irv with this delicate little tool that we built. So we started off with, Chuck McFan made an adapter from that hex in the pipe threaded in valve cover to a square that you could get a gigantic crescent wrench on. So we bought a crescent wrench. It's probably a 2-foot crescent wrench, the biggest one I've ever seen. And if you look at it now, it's got a bent handle because the wrench wasn't enough to break this loose. They put a pipe on it, didn't break it loose, did bend the handle of this crescent wrench. It's Craftsman, so I guess we could take it back as long as Sears is still in business and get a new one. But then we brought in the big guns, and Chuck manufactured this gigantic wrench. It engages the square on the top of the tool in the valve cover. It has 2 4-foot, 1-inch square steel bars bolted on either side. We happened to have a Mustang car club visit the garage one day, so we had a bunch of guys standing around. So we put 3 or 4 of them on each end of this bar and had them grunt and push, and we finally broke the thing loose, successfully, and were able to get to the exhaust valve. And this is a picture of Chuck McFan, so some of you may recognize Chuck. That's about as happy as he ever looked. But the reason for celebration is he has the number 5 exhaust valve in his hand there, so we were successful in extracting all the valves, cleaning them up, and getting good compression on the engine. Another thing we did was, I refer to this as Seagrave archaeology. The paint on the engine was badly deteriorated from sitting outside literally for decades, rain, sun, everything. But there were places on the vehicle where it had been protected by bodywork, or in this case, this is inside the left front wheel well. So the fender helped protect it, the tire helped protect it, the bodywork helped protect it. So this is what the original paint looked like. So that was our paint reference. So we used that as a guide to identify the paint color we wanted to paint it. Another thing that's interesting to look at here is that you see this little gold colored thing. Well, that is actually gold. Gold leaf on the springs. There's gold leaf on the frame where you can't even see it. There's gold leaf all over the place, pinstripes and gold leaf. So it turns out the engine had been painted, I think by hand, over all of this. So all the bodywork that was exposed had been painted with red paint. But there were places where the red paint, after sitting outside for many years, had deteriorated to the point that we could see the gold leaf underneath. So I went around and photographed all those things, measured where the gold leaf stripes were, the filigree work, the pinstripes, measured all that stuff and made a dimension drawing so we'd know exactly where the new stuff would go when we restored it later on. So this is the dash again, a little bit closer look. A couple of interesting things about this. First of all, you can get a sense of how badly deteriorated everything was. By the way, these are some switches that control lights. This is the ignition switch up here. This is another light switch. This is the speedometer. And, I'm sorry, this is the, see, what is that? Well, that's the electrics, the battery current, the charging current. This is the odometer and speedometer, and this is a sight glass. The glass is broken, but it's simply a pipe that comes up, and if there's oil pressure, oil dribbles past the sight glass and goes back into the engine. So it only tells you that there's oil and it's moving, so that's as close as we have to an oil pressure gauge. The interesting thing about the odometer was that it showed about 333 miles on the odometer. And we're saying, well, has it been around once or what? You know, we didn't know what this represented. And after thinking about it a while, I thought, well, this is 1920. How big was Livermore? Well, it was pretty small. How often do you have a fire? How far would the engine have to go every time there was a fire? And it was also armed with the knowledge, after having driven the fire engine, I'll guarantee you, it is not a pleasant thing to drive. So you're not going to take it out for a joyride on Sunday. So it wouldn't be driven very much. So I concluded that it's very entirely possible, and in fact we believe that this is the actual mileage on the engine, less than 350 miles since new. And there's some other evidence that well, if you go back to that picture I had looking up at the bottom inside the crankcase, when we took the oil pan off, we didn't know what we'd find. You know, squirrel nest, dead birds, gunk, you know, La Brea tar pit kind of stuff. Not clear what we'd find. What we found was actually quite clean, very usable. We plastic gauged all the wrist pin, the rod bearings and the main bearings, all with original factory specs. no sign of wear at all. So I think it's entirely, well, we've concluded that indeed the engine only had less than 350 miles on it when we started the restoration. That's what the instrument panel looks like today. This gauge is, turns out, Harley-Davidson. They have an electric gauge on one of their old motorcycles that was the same gauge. Everything else is restored. The Bosch magneto we went through in detail, so got it running. The sight glass is back, so when the engine's running, you'll see oil dripping through there. And there's still less than 500 miles on the engine after we've driven it for several years. And there's a compression release handle, all restored and re-chromed. Now, the many parts of the engine were not in good shape. One of the reasons that the Seagate was not a delight to drive is the brakes are really bad. There are no brakes on the front wheels. The service brake, when you push your foot on the brake pedal, is a band around the outside of a drum on the jack axle. And so, of course, if you can imagine, if the chain breaks, then you have no brakes attached to the road. So they have a hand brake, which actually looks like a 60s vintage drum brake, internal drum brake. And that's actuated by a big lever on the outside of the driver's seat. Well, the Seagate had been in an accident, run into something. And again, having driven it, I can easily understand how that would happen. So these are the headlights, so the left and right headlight, and you can see there are a number of dents resulting from the accident that was in. So I want to kind of give you a step-by-step of how this was restored. This is after Jim Dumke spent many, many hours doing metal work, very gently tinkering on the metal, tapping it out, and smoothing the metal out. So there's no body fill or anything. This is the metal, and he was able to smooth out pretty much all the wrinkles. From there, we did cleaned it up and had it replated. And these are what the headlights look like now after the repair and replating. This is the emblem on the hood of the fire engine. And enough of this was present that we could photograph it and use that as a guide for the restored emblem. And you'll notice there, everything you see that's gold colored is actually gold. There are two shades of gold. This is 24 karat gold, and this is, I'm not sure, 18 or 22 karat or some other different alloy of gold, fineness of gold, to give a different shade of color. Most all of this was reproduced exactly as it was from the original materials. Where it was obscured, one of the people who's painted on the building downtown, Randy Jennings, was an ex-fireman, and he did artwork on cars, pinstriping and so forth. He, using the San Francisco style of filigree work, reproduced a lot of the stuff as it would have been on the engine. So it's pretty much exactly like it was, or I'm quite confident would have been in 1920. This is another detail of what it looks like. One thing I wanted to point out here is this shading was done after the gold leaf was applied with a translucent tinting paint to give shading and give an enhanced idea of what the three dimensions look like. And we'll actually see some video of real Ralph Newman doing the gold leaf work on the fire engine, so you can sort of get a sense of what the process was. And just to tell you, foreshadow for you what it looked like, first thing we did is did the design work to either recreate what was already in the engine or what would have been on the engine, transfer that from paper to the red paint using a chalk-like process, then paint an adhesive, kind of a slow-drying lacquer, onto the red paint, and then use gold leaf, which is very extremely thin gold, pressed it into this sizing or adhesive, let that all dry, and then use a paintbrush or a cloth to brush off all the gold leaf that wasn't actually attached. And you'll see what that looks like prior to the adding paint. And of course the finishing touch is the pinstriping to outline all the gold, and the shading and the additional little details which really enhance the appearance of the end product. There's a close-up detail. There are highlights that he added, again, to enhance the 3D appearance of the gold leaf work. And this is his signature, which I'm sure you can't read, but it says Real Ralph. It's on the fire engine, and if you come to the garage to look at it in person, I won't tell you where it is. I'll just leave it for you to find it, because it's an interesting little Where's Waldo moment. So the fire engine appeared in a number of parades starting about a year after we started the restoration. At that point, we hadn't attacked the wheels and tires yet, but the frame and a lot of the woodwork was restored. We're not in drivable condition, but in showable condition, and Allen's Towing put it on their truck and drove it through the parade. You'll see some video of that. The following year, it was drivable, so that's Irv Stowers and me in the engine at the rodeo parade. And this is a subsequent year, which you don't have any video of, but this is Irv and I and the mayor, Marchand, and a couple of city councilmen in the back of the Seagrave. And you can see we're pretty much complete with the restoration. And there are still a few little details we're still working on, but basically it's now complete. So what I want to do now is transition to a video, and I think the quality is a little better if I do it from DVD rather than from a QuickTime video on the computer. So give me just a second to get that fired up. Okay, this is mostly just ambient sound, so I may narrate over some of this, and some of it you'll be able to understand. So the person talking, sitting on the right side of the table is Randy Jennings. He did the original layout work for the filigree on the fire engine.
Kind of fun for them because most of the stuff there's easy access to, and the runs aren't real long, and where they are real long, they're kind of hidden.
Is it a badger brush? Something like that, put the gold down?
That's for the hood.
Special brush?
They use a,
It's not cigars, that's gold leaf. The gold leaf was donated by Vance Caballero from the jewelry store. And this is the state of the Seagrave, disassembled. Not a lot of restoration work started yet, and you can see the jugs on the engine, somewhat like an aircraft engine where the head and the cylinder are integral. External valve springs, nowadays that's all inside the engine, but in these days it was on the outside. And there's the soldier spark plugs all lined up. Yes.
You know, kind of just and right behind this Ford Model T chemical fire truck is more of Livermore's past. This beauty coming up now is a 1920 Seagate fire truck and is not yet completely restored, but obviously well on its way. This was the first commercially made fire truck ever purchased by the city of Livermore. It was purchased in 1920 for $10,750 and was used from 1920 to about 1960. It was acquired by the Livermore Heritage Guild in 1980 and restoration began in September 2008. The truck has a 6-cylinder, 1,012 cubic inch, 110 horsepower engine which drives a 800 gallon per minute water pump.
September 4th, 2010, preparing for a first attempt to start the engine.
see this part there?
That was me. Oh.
We got good spark.
Oh, no, that was Fred Dietrich and Irv Stowers with cameras. Rock and roll, yes.
That's a lot more spectacular than just running.
to the left of Jim Victor there, another cross out.
Okay, is this thing over with the smoke?
The smoke was coming from the new high-temperature paint we had on the manifold, exhaust manifold. But you may have noticed the guy with the fire extinguisher taking an interest to make sure it wasn't anything too alarming. You know pictures? The fellow in the green shirt next to me is from New Zealand. He worked for Bruce McLaren and raced Can-Am cars back in the 60s.
This is Seagate. This is an amazing entry right now. It's Livermore's first commercial fire truck, built in 1916. The vehicle was restored by 12 volunteers. This was an absolute piece of junk about a year ago. 12 volunteers associated with the Heritage Guild. The restoration has been underway for 2.5 years, and donations are continuing to be accepted to be paid for the gold leaf decorations. It's driven today by Herb Stowers, and the passenger is Will Bolton.
You got about 8 inches, 5, 4, 3.
So the gold leaf work was done by real Ralph Newman from Boulder Creek. He's done work for some of the major car collections across the country. Very well known, very talented. And this just gives you a sense of how he approached it. So he's putting on the adhesive, the sizing for the gold leaf now.
It actually was an accident.
He puts some yellow pigment. It's otherwise clear, so he puts some yellow pigment in it so he can see where it is. Otherwise, he wouldn't know where. Once he painted it, he wouldn't know where it was.
That's a lot of discretionary money.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where my.
Yes. Yeah, you have a couple hours to put the gold leaf in it before it dries.
Even my very wealthy clients, rather than them doing 4 or 5.
I spent a lot of time sitting with him, videotaping his process. He's got interesting stories, very interesting person. I'm just fascinated by his ability to control that brush and do really fine work.
Try to put the white line on there.
There's a piece of tape below where he's putting the white stripe, and that's just for reference. He's not using it as an actual guide for the line. Well, the parts that we could take off and take to his shop, probably that took, I don't know, maybe a month to get all those parts done. Then he came to the garage and did the
January
parts we
14th,
couldn't take to his shop.
2012,
And that was
hood
maybe a week and a
adjustments
half or
and
so. then
reassembly of
completed.
the truck.
Yeah,
Well, that's because Herb said you.
and Ralph put the gold, the stripes on it.
Just like downtown.
I didn't hear camera action.
Oh, that's the problem. Director's problem.
One of the problems with that one is magneto, it's got some
Kind of a sandwich.
That's, the running boards are, pretty much all the wood on the vehicle is either oak or sycamore. And Ralph Moyer has a place south of town with big sycamore trees on it. One of his trees fell over, or part of it fell over. So he milled the lumber and donated the sycamore wood for the wooden, some of the wooden parts, most of the wooden parts, like the hose bed and so forth. So one thing that's really impressed me about this process was we were told, yeah, this will take you 10 years, 10, 12 years to do. So we were essentially done in about 3.5 years. And it's just amazing what you can do with a group of people that have skills, work together, and are mostly focused on the goal, not looking for glory for themselves. And that's the end product. So I would invite you to come to the I would invite you to come to the Duarte Garage. We have open houses the third Sunday of each month, except for the holiday season around January and December, and in May when we have our annual auction. Or, I've talked to John about this, if you want to set up a special tour, like some Saturday, just we can work out the time and we'll open up the garage for your group. So, thank you very much.
So how many would like to have, we pick a Saturday, and Will will host the servers that come. You can bring your better half and your grandkids and stuff like that. Show me a hand. All right, we'll get an email out and pick a Saturday.
Sounds good.
So, questions?
Yes, sir.
Was the engine made by Seagate or by an engine maker like Hall Scott?
It was made by Seagate. It's an F6 engine made by Seagate. Interesting enough, Seagate made a lot of the other parts that are on the engine. For example, there are some kerosene lanterns that are used to mark, like at night, to mark the engine. Those are Seagate stamped. So a lot of the parts on the engine are Seagate, and we were fortunate enough to be able to find those parts and restore them and put them back on the engine.
Did you restore the hydraulic gear too, the pumps?
We had to restore the vanes. There's two pumps. There's a centrifugal pump, which is a high volume pump, and there's also a vane pump, which is basically a vacuum pump. So if you're pulling water using the hard suction hose out of a pond or a ditch or something like that, or a cistern, you need to prime the centrifugal pump. So you use a vane pump to basically create enough vacuum to pull water into the centrifugal, the vane pump to pull water into the centrifugal pump. So the centrifugal pump is fine. It was just dandy the way it was. We had to replace the vanes because whatever they're made of, it disappeared. So we remade the vanes out of new material. I think Delaran is what we used for the new vanes. Works fine. Yes, sir.
Have you ever pumped water through the restoration?
We have not, and there's a lot of controversy about that because when you start throwing water around, you know, we've got a very nice paint job, we've got gold leaf, we've got $3,000 leather upholstery job on the seat, so we kind of hate to jeopardize that stuff. So we have not, and I kind of doubt that we will. I have no doubt that the pump will work, So I don't feel we need to prove it. So, oh, another, yeah.
Has the Seagate company ever invited you to fly back there and do this presentation for them?
They haven't, and you know, they have surprisingly little interest in restored Seagate engines. It was we were fortunate enough to get that picture I showed you from them, but they really don't have a lot of interest. You know, they're focused on their products and making money today, and I guess they don't feel that their history has a lot to do with their ability to sell fire engines and make money today. Yes, sir.
Are they making fire engines today
Yes, they are. They're still in business.
all over the United States?
As far as I know, yes.
I was going to ask the same question, see if they had a junkyard you could go to.
Well, as far as I know, they don't have junkyards, but there are a lot of Seagraves that are in various states of disrepair, sort of like what the picture of ours looked like before we started the restoration. And you can buy parts from the ones that still exist out there that are being parted out. And there's a club, as you'd expect on the internet, there's a Seagrave Association, and they're helpful in terms of finding parts. Some of the stuff, well, for example, there's a stand, a thing that's bolted to the running board in the back that holds one of those kerosene lanterns. It's a bronze casting. So we borrowed one from San Mateo, who also has a 1920 Seagrave. We made a mold from that. Actually sent it to a fellow in Oregon who does bronze casting for a living. He made a mold from the original part, then cast the bronze part, cleaned it up, sent it back to us, and we sent it off to be plated. So we had to reproduce that because we didn't have the original part. But fortunately, we were able to borrow one and make one. So the parts came from all sorts of different sources, even manufacturing some.
How about the hoses along the side? Were those original, or did you have to replace all that?
Those are original.
Oh, okay.
The hard suction hose and the soft suction hose, which is curled up on the right side running board. If you have a hydrant, then you can use the soft hose, which will bend around easily, and you can use that to extract water, take water from the hydrant, because there's enough pressure in the hydrant to get the pump working. If you're running out of a pond, for example, if you try to use a soft hose, as soon as the air pump, primer pump starts pumping, it'll just collapse. So that's where you use a hard suction hose. Those are original. And we kind of cleaned them up a little bit, one more than the other, but they have some original molding stuff in the sides of the hoses, so we didn't want to disturb that. But those are original.
What are they made of? What's the material?
It's kind of a canvas hose, but it's reinforced with many, many layers of rubber, hard rubber.
Oh, okay.
And they're bent a little bit, but not very much. They're pretty rigid, so they won't collapse.
Thank you.
How did you paint it?
Well, the red paint was done, there's a story there. So originally what we were going to do is try and get the engine running so that we could put this ratty old diseased looking piece of junk like the guy referred to there in the parade and advertise for donations. So when we started working on the engine and discovered it was in pretty good shape and ran pretty well, then we said, well, okay, let's see if we can round up enough money to buy some paint and we'll paint this. So we went to Tri-Valley Auto Body, and that happened to be at a time when the economy had crumped and foreclosures, the economy wasn't doing well. People weren't repairing their cars, but JR at Tri-Valley didn't want to lose his guys. So we said, tell you what, I'll donate the labor to repaint the red parts if you provide the paint. And that's a terrific deal. So we started looking around for donations to buy the paint. And he said, let me talk to my supplier, maybe I can get you a good price. So he talked to his paint supplier and explained the project, and he says, we'll just donate the paint. So we got donated labor and donated paint. And if you were to pay for the red paint job on the engine, I'm guessing $20,000, $25,000. We got that for free. So a lot of this project depended on the generosity of the local community here. So both people in business like Tri-Valley Auto, Lance Cavalieri, who donated the gold leaf, and just individuals who made cash donations. So it was really quite a process. And then Real Ralph, nobody was going to donate that much labor, that much skilled labor. So we had to pay him to do the gold leaf stuff, but it was well worth it because it's really a world-class job. Roger?
Do you have it insured?
Yes, we do.
How much?
That's our trade secret.
Are there other similar restoration jobs around?
There are other Seagraves around. As I said, San Mateo has a 1920. Alameda at the old Naval Air Station has another sea grave. It's in the 20s. I don't know, it's not exactly the same year, early 20s. I personally don't think either one of those, San Mateo is the closest, but I don't think any of them are close to the quality of this restoration. But there are others around, even here in the Bay Area.
So Mexico.
Great, okay, well, thank you. I look forward to seeing you at the garage when you come for a tour.
Bill, you have anything else?